want to finish off with two questions, Tabita. The first one, it's probably a bit more difficult for you to answer. So, in Australia, for instance, a few years ago, there was a report by the Australian government detailing what it called Chinese political interference, entrenchment in Australian politics. And since then, we've seen a lot of moves by the Australian government. We've seen a lot of rhetoric from the Australian media that's very anti-China. So Australia, for whatever reason, have sort of taken a lead in showing that it's not just infrastructure. There's also political entrenchment. There's some involvement. There's interference. There's pressure. I think they found evidence of Chinese funding towards local political campaigns. So it was quite localized as well in Australia. There's all sorts of conversations in Sri Lanka about Chinese interference and about money going into politics, about China funding electoral campaigns. We mentioned the Rajapaksa's, that's something that's been spoken about. How do you view that? I mean, is there something insidious or something a little bit that we should be suspicious of China, not in terms of the financial investment, but in terms of how it is seeking to gain influence in local politics through political individuals? Is something that's come up in your research?
I think it's certainly a factor, and it's a factor in many countries. China's doing this not just in Australia, but in a lot of different countries. And I mean, I know China has also financed different presidential campaigns in Sri Lanka. So
is that right?
It's not exactly a new thing.
So you're saying that's a fact?
There have been different investments being made to.
You have data that supports that?
There are different articles, and I mean, most of these are open source. Okay. So, and this is, I mean, just to say that sometimes they don't come. Sometimes these money doesn't come directly from the Chinese government. They come from state-owned enterprises. They come from different other, or they can come in the form of different gifts, different, let's say, how to put it, access to different things. These kinds of incentives, right? So, but I think that this is, again, we have to sort of, not to play the devil's advocate too much, but just to say that we also have to recognize that this is happening in geopolitics in general. This is like a great power rival kind of thing. We do see that the U.S. has also made significant, contributions to different places in different governance structures. There's been a lot of this taking place, generally speaking. I'm not trying to say that China has no fault in this whatsoever. I'm just trying to say that, unfortunately, it is a big factor when it comes to politics, and especially in developing countries where China really wants to have a stake, really wants to have a say, that really wants to make sure. I mean, China's been making sure that it would have access to, let's say, different politicians, I think, and not necessarily just the ruling, but also the opposition, especially in recent years. So this is something that I've seen in different places. This is also something we've seen not necessarily in Scandinavia in the same sense, but what we have had, for example, is the 100 Flowers program, or the 1,000, I think it's the 100 or it's the 1,000 Flowers program. This is essentially a program in which China has been trying to make sure that it had strategic access to certain key researchers and stuff like this that were gaining incentives to. So we do see stuff like this. I mean, it's quite clear that there is a concerted effort, but I would just say, it's quite clear that China has a strategy with this. It's quite clear that there are certain political motivations at play. I would just say, I do believe that a lot of other countries would do or are doing the same thing. And that's, again, not to shift the blame or to take the load off, but just to say.
So Tabita, just to finish off, I guess my final question will be around what's in store. So China currently is going through some economic issues of its own.
Right.
Currently, I think GDP figures for Q2 haven't been released yet. Analysts haven't been able to. They're saying consumer confidence is apparently quite low. Manufacturing output is apparently quite low. Exports have fallen off a little bit. Then we had the collapse of China's largest property developer, Evergrande, and basically people, thousands of people protesting about they're losing their deposits on their housing, on their shelter. Quite apart from the zero COVID policy, which has had a huge impact on the Chinese economy. Given all of this, and I think there's a lot of analysis that suggests there will be a recession towards the end of this year, early next year, and some of it might flow from China, slow down. Given all of this, can you briefly tell us what the future of the Belt and Road Initiative is going forward, because there's clearly going to be, there's rationalizing from the host countries. They're all thinking, maybe we should be a little careful, pulling back a little bit, being a little more selective.
Right.
And on the other side, China's also having economic problems of its own. They see their perception suffering because of Belt and Road Initiative projects that haven't worked out. So they're very mindful of their image, aren't they? They know how they're viewed, and they want to control that narrative as well. And given that Sri Lanka still needs so much investment, can we still depend on China as a development partner? Is China going to slow down with the Belt and Road Initiative? What's your point of view?
I mean, it's still early days, so it's hard to really judge right now. As you say, there's still some figures we haven't seen. But I think generally speaking, China has realized that perhaps it has been stretching itself a little bit too thin when it comes to certain investments. And the investment patterns we have seen have been, to a certain extent, detrimental to China's own economy, especially because the loans have just been extended and extended and extended. And I think China now realizes, okay, the next step is to perhaps move away from very, very heavy investments and move towards more soft power measures. So when I mentioned these new global initiatives, the global development, the global security, and all of these things, I mean, they are essentially about portraying China as a different, more, let's say, harmonious and a beneficial presence that is not rooted in just pure economical clout, you can say. I think this is going to be one of the things we see now. They are going to restructure perhaps the ways in which the loans are extended, the ways in which the investments are extended. I could at least imagine that. But I also do think that they're probably going to make sure that going forward, any investments that are made focus more on soft power measures, such as the Green Silk Road or the Health Silk Road, or all of these underlying branches of the Belt and Road Initiative that have been developing over the past few years. So things that afford China more credit in different sectors, that win more, let's say, people's hearts, that establish more people-to-people bonds, and all of these things, that is very much a part of making sure the initiative remains stable. And with that, I think we'll see perhaps a bit of a refocus from China's side, but I could be wrong. It could also, I mean, we've seen, a lot of changes and shifts, and the Chinese internal political structure is quite opaque. You never truly know what's going to take place, so we'll see what happens, I guess.
Well, that's very interesting, Tabita. So thanks a lot for your time with us, and all the best for your research in the future. And we hope we can have you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.